All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session for data management and data migration best practices. We have a lot of content to show and also some demos and some best practices that we would like to share. All this is a compilation of a lot of experience that we are observing across different projects, different implementations worldwide, and also how we recommend to use the different tool sets. So we hope you find helpful this session. So one of the things that we would like to answer in this session is on every project we have the typical question like how we can use the different tools that we have available. We have been, let's say, sharing tools like an LCS, the configuration manager, or the process data packages, or inside of Dynamics AX for the Dynamics 365 for operations, the data import-export framework, and all the other frameworks. How I can use those tool sets for the purpose of data management and migration. Also, there is also the common questions how we can optimize the data migration process. Yeah, what little things we have available that makes a big difference when you are managing big amounts of data, and how you can improve the speed. Also, it's not just the performance and loading, so the speed of moving all this data from one environment to another, or from your legacy systems to Dynamics 365 for operations. So, and I'm sure that you have more questions. This is just a high-level thing, but let's start with the session. I have Gokul, my colleague here. You would like to introduce yourself?
Hi all, my name is Gokul. I met some of you in yesterday's session, so I'm part of the solution architect team, same as Alejandro.
Yeah, my name is Alejandro Gutierrez, also part of the R&D team and the solution architecture team, and we focus mostly on working with customers worldwide, doing the fast track program that I will assume that you already are aware of that program. And we have other programs as well that how we interact with the different projects. So in the agenda, we will talk about the different data management scenarios and tools, the DXF framework, templates, a common feature that is many times, let's say, not being used properly, or we don't, how we can use it properly in a way that we can increase the speed on implementations. The cross-company data sharing framework. Gokul will show something about the data migration, some cool tips that you will find very helpful, auto-sequencing, bundling, uploading data, and general recommendations and resources where you can go and learn more about all this stuff that we're going to share. So in your different data management scenarios, you can either, depending the stage of the project, you can start with an environment that has a blank database, which is typically when you start to create your golden environment or your staging environment that you are going to put all your configurations. Or you will have potentially other teams working on migrations, analyzing, so, okay, what data you are going to bring from the previous system to the new one. But there is a point in the project that you need to start to, okay, how we can move my configurations from one legal entity to another, or from one environment to another, because at the end we have a ecosystem of environments. So all these the scenarios makes we make the life a little bit easier when we start to combine frameworks and tools. When I say that, is that it's not just DIXF. One year ago, when we started with Dynamics 365 for operations, the only tool that we were basically promoting to use was the DIXF, but right now we have more. We can also use the data sharing framework that basically share data across legal entities for specific tables, and also we allow to do some what we call database operations to move databases between environments under certain, let's say, considerations, right? So, but when we start to combine all these three scenarios in one, depending the stage of the project, your projects will go faster in this topic of data management, because rather than consider the full scope, let's say, of all the data entities that we share to implement Dynamics, you can finish with a small number of data entities that are really important, because you are already sharing data by design, sharing data with the framework, the cross-data sharing, cross-data sharing framework, or the AXF. Also, we have LCS. In LCS, we use the copy configurations, the configuration manager, or the process data package that I'm going to explain what is it. But there are other layers of how we can use these tools. And as you know, at this point, we're also working with another tool that is not, we are not changing the base, meaning that the data import-export framework. We are adding a new tool on top of that model that is to manage configurations, to copy configurations. And I think there is also another session today that will talk more about the copy configurations. But in order to use that tool that we are building, you need to understand all this first. Yeah? If you have good handling all these base concepts, the other tool will come easy. And it's just to automate all the things that right now, at some degree, we need to do it manually. But we are working to improve all this. So let's talk about the first one, the data import-export framework. For this one, in this conference, we had covered different topics about data. You have sessions for Power BI, for mobile applications, for integrations, Office integration, or Power Apps, for example, all the CDS. In this session, we're going to focus on configurations and data migration. So that way we complete the picture. But the main message here is that all of this is using a common framework, which is the data import-export framework, and all of these frameworks, all of these different ways to consume this framework use data entities. So that's still an important concept that we need to consider. For the ones that are new in this process, in this concept of data entities, I will go a little bit, I'm going to explain a little bit of the basics quickly, just to get up to speed. The data entities is basically, let's take a look at this example of customer data. This is a typical scenario that we used to see in 2012, AX 2012, where we have several tables that we needed to load in order to get just one customer record. In Dynamics 365 for operations, we moved to a denormalized view of data, where we are not looking for the table itself. It's more like we talk about what we see in the form. We are looking for the customer form, and we look for a data entity customer. Yeah? Behind the scenes, yes, when we build this data entity, we connect all those tables. It can be one single table or a combination of tables. But the concept is that we make it easier to consume data, and it's more like a functional point of view when we are consuming. When we design, yes, we need to understand all these tables reference. But in general, it's a data entity is a denormalized view of the database. So how we can create those data entities? We have different ways to do it. You can use a wizard. We have invested on a wizard, and we continue enhancing this wizard to create data entities. Or you can go directly to the table and create the data entity just for that table, or for an API. Why if we are offering data entities by default, why we need to create new ones? Because potentially you will customize something, and you need to create the data entity, because it's the only entry point to the system or output. Yeah? So you need to go through the experience of development. If you go to the wiki, you will find more details on how to create data entities, and there are some cool scenarios about composite data entities, and some examples how you can experience this. Talking about aggregation. So I just mentioned data entities, and a data entities is built from a table. But there are more levels. If we take a data entities, great. We are shipping more than 1,900 data entities in the standard. Those data entities, this number is increasing. I still remember when we have the CTP releases, we have only 1,000, and after 1 year, we almost duplicated the number of data entities, and we are still adding more. Yeah? So you can imagine the experience between the first implementations with a certain amount of data entities compared to what you have right now. And we are keeping adding more. And the feedback here is very important, because if you have a project where you have a data entity that is not available and it's important for your implementation, it's important that you share those with us, because we develop the new missing data entities based on demand. Yeah? So it's great having this big number of data entities, but being practical, when you are implementing, when you are configuring, managing that big number of data entities become a problem also, because it's basically file by file. Yeah? So it becomes a slow process. So it's why we move to this concept of data packages, where the data package is it's a bundle of data entities. It's an encapsulation of data entities, with the difference that in that data package, we define also other aspects like the sequence. In one data package, we can have, let's take the example, 10 data entities, and we identify in which sequence we want to load those data entities. So it's the next level. But there is another area that we have templates. And templates are helpful when you want to, let's say, merge data packages. Yeah? We are shipping 250 data packages, and maybe more now, that you can use for your own implementations as a reference. If you go to the wiki in this data package section, you will see all the data packages that we are shipping, and those are standard data package, reference data package. Yes, you can go and use those and consume directly those and put your own data, but it's still 250 data packages is still a challenge, right? It's 255 that potentially you could use in one implementation. The reality is that you can optimize that even to the next level, combining. Yeah? Perhaps you want to load only data for general ledger, data for accounts payable, or for accounts receivable, or procurement and sourcing. So you can create one single package for each group, basically. Yeah? How you can do that? Using templates. You can use the tool for templates, take the standard data package that we are shipping, and blend those and create one single one. So that way you don't need to load manually, and still you can use a lot of information that we have in those data packages about the sequencing, because that's another value here. If I am a consultant, that is the first time that I am configuring this system. I don't know nothing about how to configure an account structure. And maybe I don't have somebody on my side that this is telling me, okay, use this order. If I go to a data package to load account structure, potentially I will see like 10 data entities that will show me the order that I need to follow to configure. If I do it manually, I will probably have a 99% success rate that I will be able to configure properly. So in reality, it's a very good source of information on how to configure the system. And we are transporting this data, this information to a data package. So when you implement, you know your practice, you know how to do the best configuration for manufacturing, perhaps for retail, or for project and accounting, and you have your best recipe, how to implement and how you, by experience, know how you can go fast, right? So think, if you take that knowledge into data package, okay, this is the sequence that we configure, it's how you can blend this knowledge with the process of managing data. Yeah? There is one missing piece about how I can document all this, and I'm going to show you some examples how you can do it. If I take this to the next level, maybe I can finish with 10 data packages, one for each model, AP, AR, and system administration, and in summary, all the ones that I need for configure one environment. There is a point on my process that those packages are tested. Those contains golden configurations. We are happy with those, but we don't want to, let's say, to manage 10 files. So it's when PDPs or process data package becomes handy. So you can create in LCS one process data package containing those 10 data packages, and just process that file, and LCS will take care to handle this 10 data package. So it's similar to the data package, but bundling all of them and define the sequence. So we have, from the table, we move to the data entity. From the data entity, we move to the data project. From the data project, you can blend with templates. You still have LCS to create process data package and combine all of those. So you can finish with only one single data package if you want. Yeah? So I will show you examples how I can do this process, creating one legal entity with just one data package. And it takes maybe 5 minutes to load all this data. Or create one legal entity with blank database, perhaps using 15 minutes. The key here is design properly those data package. Yeah? And to make sure that your data reference is right. Yes, I know the first versions will be kind of bumpy, and we are aware of that, and we know that we need to provide better tools to do error handling and be more proactive on this processing of data projects in the data import export framework. But we are working on that in the copy configurations tool that we are building. But the end point is, if once you design all this and you understand all the process, it becomes simple to process this data. So in summary, you have 2 entry points for this process. It's Dynamics 365 in the data management workspace and also the data sharing framework. And in LCS, you have the asset library where you can store all your data packages, your reference data package, and the configuration data manager that will help you to orchestrate the, let's say, the import, the population of environments using LCS. And the process data package, which is one level above of a configuration manager, that basically what it does is to determine a sequence. If you go to the configuration manager, there is no a sequence. It's just select data package and push that data to an environment. With a PDP, you establish that sequence inside of LCS. So let's talk about configurations. Plan for configurations. One of the common issues that I see across project, and this is happening on small projects, medium and big ones. And many times when we start a project, I have observed that we jump into environments. Yes, we need to plan demos and start to maybe configure. But one of the common mistakes that I see is that we miss to document what we configure. Perhaps we create or test a scenario, is good, but I observed that we don't follow like a good practice. Okay, this scenario has been tested, now let's document it. And I am not meaning that we need to create Word documents and document all those configurations. It's at least have this whole environment that we can move all our tested configurations and define the scope that what we are configuring. So my first observation here is that one of the first things that we need to understand is when we define the scope, and we know that because when we do analysis, and we know what we want to implement, right? If this project is meant to implement manufacturing, I don't have nothing to do with retail. Yeah? So I should discard all the data packages connected to retail, for example. And even in the system, I use disable retail, for example. So first is identify the scope that you have in the project. And the project can be in phases. So not necessarily you will hit all the data in phase 1. So you can have one legal entity that has a specific scope, so you identify the scope for that initial, let's say, phase. The next is that when you identify the scope for the next legal entities, and you need to start to answer questions, is those legal entities share configurations or they are different? Yeah. Why this is important? Because when you are managing data, you need to have clear that picture. Because if not, you are going to start to load redundant data that is already shared by design, by the system, and you don't need to load it again. So that takes me to the next point, that there are data in, for example, general ledger that I mean, I don't need to load it again. And how I can identify that? Every time that you use a data package, the ones that we are shipping by a standard, there is a name on the data package. If you see the word shared, it's meaning that you don't need to load that data package again and again for each legal entity. I will show you some examples. But the main point here is that when you design the scope, it's important to identify which configurations are shared. Also, I have seen just a few projects using very creatively the data sharing framework. This framework is new. Yes, it's limited, but it helps a lot if you combine with data entities because this framework, basically what you do is you identify which tables you can share, and Google will explain more about this, but in this framework, we can, let's say, share term of payment or some of these tables. So that means that I don't need to load that data again when I create a new legal entity. So there is one data entity that, yes, I know that data entity needs to be loaded in the next legal entities, but because I am enabling that sharing in this framework, I don't need it, just I remove it. It's one data entity less that I need to load. So that means my data package start to decrease. And finally, there is another interesting fact is that to identify which data entities contains data pointing to the legal entities. This is important when we are creating more than one legal entity. Let's say we observe projects like handling more than 100 legal entities. This becomes a challenge, right? So in reality, let's say we focus only on financials, and some part of, let's say, procurement and sourcing and sales and marketing. If I take the full scope of data entities, at analyzing the data, there are only potentially five data entities that I need to go and modify the value of legal entity. It can be ledger, number sequence references, and the calendars. Beyond that, assuming that I am sharing configurations, I don't need to worry about the others. So it's kind of quick to create new legal entities if I have a proper plan. Yep. This is one example, and I would like to show you directly, and one way how I like to show how to document this, and this is actually, let me expand, let me see if the resolution is good. Okay, so hopefully well, maybe in the back will be challenging to see, but I will try to do it this way. So when I say the data packages that we ship as a standard, all those data packages can be obtained in LCS. So you can download all of them. So basically what I did here is take all this information and put it in a way that I can work with and plan my configuration based on that. So here, all this numbering that you see is the naming convention that we use for the data package that we ship. It has a meaning. It's the module and the different groups that we do for all those data packages. So here's where I can see all these more than 250 data packages that I was talking about. Yeah, and they are organized by area. So each data package, let's say, if I select one of them, let me go back to the example of a general, a very basic one that account structures. Let's take this one. So this data package, in reality, has when I use this data package, I have this number of data entities. So I can do some. Create some groups for those. For me, I will call this is part of my general ledger scope. And it's not the only data package. If I sort by general ledger, I will have like perhaps 5 or 6 data packages that combined creates my configuration for general ledger. So, but the most interesting part is the one that I would like to show you in the next columns. Let me just remove. One 1 second. It's on freeze. Okay. So if I go to the next, yes, I have information about the sequencing, which this information is available in the wiki. I mean, I just took that information here so I know in which order I need to load. Why this is important? Because I create new data entities. I will come here and add that data entity. So I know this part of my package. So the next group is this question that I was talking about. First is if this is part of my scope of my project, if this is part of the scope to create new legal entities, if this data entity is shared by design, if this if the data behind this data entity is shared with the data sharing framework, if this data entity has data pointing to my legal entity. So if I remove this filter, analyzing this, let me just select for one so I'd say I want to select everything that is on the scope for my project. So now, maybe it's hard to see with the zoom, but now I can see all these configurations are part of the scope of my project. I can finish with, in the 1,000 records that I have in this file, I just need 233. But if I move to the next level, I want to remove everything that we share by design. So I can say, no, so now the number reduced to 200. So I just because of that filter, I removed 80 data entities. So if I take to the next level, it's I'm sharing data. So I want to remove everything that I'm sharing already. So the number is decreasing to 191, and I can keep adding. So what I try to show here is that if you have a way to document and to plan what you are configuring and answering those questions, when you design your data package, you are going to finish with a small data package rather than go to LCS and download this 200 data package that will take you forever to process. They are good reference, good information, but they are reference data package. Yeah? Use them to create your own. Because of this scenario, yeah, I was talking that because of this work, if I group by model, I finish with 10 data packages, for example, in this case. And for the ones that have had the opportunity to join one of the implementation workshops that we do for Dynamics 365, we do an exercise using all this information and executing, I mean, we have hands-on lab that the participants take all this information and they process the data and they import, and after importing the data, they create transactions on the environment. So we confirm that all this concept works, yeah? So, and it's about how we design the data packages. So let me go back to, so I was talking about perfect. So we have this a big number of data packages. Now let's talk about how we can blend those. What techniques I can use to create single data package. There are different ways you can do it, yeah. But one of them is using templates. Templates is I could say, it's a hidden gem that we have in the system that very few teams are using. And but these templates, if you join the sessions for copy configurations, we are building on top of this. So it's important that you understand how templates works, because we are using this part of the system to build the next level on copy configurations. So what copy configuration does is, if we take this example of these 250 and plus data packages that contains a specific number of data entities, we can organize those by groups. So that means that when I create a template, I can create a template by each group. And it's exactly how the copy configuration will work. You will assign groups. Now, but the difference is right now, you do it manually. You need to create those groups manually. But in the new, when we release the copy configurations, we are going to provide you a way to classify those. So that's the difference. But the important thing on the templates, there are tools in templates that help you to determine dependencies between data packages. Let's say if you introduce one data entity, account structure, and you are not sure of what other data is connected to that data entity, in the templates you can identify, okay, you have perhaps potentially 20 other data entities that will use that information. For example, when you load a main account, for example. So now you can make sure that you are including all the data that you need in order to load successfully main accounts, for example. Also, the sequencing can be done here in the same way that we're going to show you some techniques about how to sequencing, but sequencing can be done in the templates as well. And you can move templates between environments. Once you create your definitions, you can move to a different environments and use the same template and export the data. And this is important, especially when you are creating a golden environment. Yeah? And at some point that you need to refresh data from one environment to another, but with certain areas only, you can use the template to extract that data and use the definition. Think about the template as the design of the data package without data. Data package contains the data entity, the sequence, and the data itself. The template is just the data entity reference and the sequence. That's it. No data on it. So it's become easy to move around projects. Let me show you one example in the system how a template looks like. Okay. I'm going to change the resolution because I have observed in previous sessions that sometimes we show things in the screen and it's very small and people in the back, it's very challenging. So hope you can see what I'm doing here. So what I'm going to do is to go to the data management workspace here. And we have templates. In templates, basically what I have here, I started the same design that I showed you in the previous screen where I have 10 data packages. So a way to, let's say, I don't want to create 10 data packages to import my data into my target environment. I need just one. So yes, I can go and take one data project and blend those directly in the data project, but the problem is that if I want to export the project, I will have that challenge. So how I can create a template that I can move across environment. So right now I have in my definition, let's say, so far 4 data packages. So in the data projects, I have imported the data package that I have here. Let's say all these 10 data package, but I want to create one single data package containing all of this. So I can create the template manually, adding the name and also adding the different data entities, but I don't want to do that. I want to save some time, so I want to basically create a new data package. Let me take one example. I want to create one for create products. I will use the same naming convention as my data package. So because there is one option that typically is here on the top, but because I changed the size is on the 3 dots, but I'm gonna create this from a data project. And because I had loaded the data project, I just want to link the project name with the data. I'm matching basically the name. So when I create this, it reads the definition of my data project and all my data entities are organized in the template. and also I can observe the dependencies. If I want to change the dependency, I can click entity sequence and change it. So if I can do the same thing for the 03 package. And let's assume that I have all the templates that I want. I have 00, 01, 02, 03, and 09. Now, those templates, I can export and import a template, move from a different environment, and use it to export data. So I'm going to close templates, and I'm going to create a new export data project. So this export data project, let's say, I'm going to call it master package, something like that. Because I know that those data package works to load data individually. I don't want to manage 5 files. I just want to manage one. So here, when I save this one, rather than select the data entities again manually, I'm going to apply a template. So in this template, what I'm going to do is to select the templates that I have available. Yeah, I have this number. So I select, specify the source. In this case, will be Excel. And I will do the same for all the data package. The only difference, when I load the second one, rather than replace, I'm going to use merge, which is the key part. So it's blending data package. So when I reach the second one, I select that package, and I'm going to hit merge. So in the same data package, I'm going to apply again a template and select the second one. So it's a little bit slow. Okay. So I'm going to do it with 2 only for now, to save some time. So this time I am merging. So what happens with the sequence? The sequence of the first template is still in line. When I add the second one, it's just adding a second group. So now I have my first package plus the 2 packages blend in just one. If I take a look on the sequence, observe I have the execution unit 1, which belongs to the first data package, and execution unit 2 that belongs to the second one. So if I keep adding data templates, it's adding a new execution unit. When I export the data, well, I just need to go and generate a data package, and I am getting one data package for all this. If I move to a different environment, or even in this one, let's assume that this is my master data package. If I close this, and I will go back to templates. And in templates, I'm going to create a new template that in this case will be the master template. So and because I have a data project, I'm going to use the same technique, just in the reverse. So I'm going to create these templates based on a data project. Which data project? The one that I just created that is blended. So when I import from a data package, create from data package, we will need network. The network. Okay, wireless is a little bit slow. Let me. Okay, let's let it run. In the meantime, we are going to connect the network so we can go faster. Okay, so the idea here is that because I have a data project that I blended, now I can create a template with all this combination of data packages. And I have this data package that I can use as a master. So, which is in this case the one that I created here. Master data package, okay. And now this version will contain all these data entities. So this is how I can save time blending and managing data package, and rather than go data entity by data entity, and perhaps have the mistake to put the wrong sequence, or if maybe I need to change the order, in this case, in the template, I can incorporate new data entities and change the sequence, and it's much faster than managing the file and creating a data project. Say, oh, we missed one data entity, we need to change it and incorporate manually. So using templates reduce all this effort to create new data projects based on the reference data projects that we are sharing. This is how, using the same technique, this is how we are able to create things like, in this case, for example, this master LE data package that contains more than 120 data entities in this example that I use for a workshop to create one environment from scratch, blank database. If I do the similar analysis based on the other template that I show you where I have my scope, I can create also one single data package to create additional legal entities, assuming that I just need to modify the data entities that contains value reference to the legal entity. So there are ways to do it and to optimize using templates. So we have more things to show. Let's move to the next topic, which is database operations. For database movement, the data movement, we introduced this scenario when we were observing that projects were deploying faster. Yeah, we have, let's say, record implementations in 45 days, for example, that teams that are deploying Dynamics and very fast. Yes, perhaps simple a scenario, no major customizations, but this is still an implementation, right? There are certain scenarios that, well, creating all these data entities, the data packages can be consuming when you need to go fast, right? So how we move from the golden environment to the UAT environment so we can do validation and testing. For those scenarios, yes, we can move the database from golden environment to the sandbox or UAT. So, but there are certain considerations that we need to have. One is that when we, let's say, and I mentioned this in a separate session on the servicing conference, where dynamic service engineering takes a role here, but when we are touching the production environment. If we are working only between our golden environment to our sandbox, we have information in the wiki how to move this database. So in the timeline of your project, you need to determine, okay, when is the right moment to move that database from golden to UAT and how to do it. We are also discussing how to introduce tools to do that, because right now it's kind of a manual process. It works, you can use it, but how it can be a self-service operation where you go and you select the source environment and the target environment and move the database. So when it's important that to mention that just when we are moving to a production environment, we need to involve dynamic service engineering for this process. So how we do that? Using the service request in LCS. If we go to LCS, in your implementation project, there is a section to do requests, and this is one of the options that we have. Do a service requests to move data from one environment to another. And let me open one of my implementation projects. There are some SLAs and that you need to plan. Let's say it's not something that happens immediately. So you do the request, and DC will process that with a specific, let's say, timeline. Also, when we move, this same scenario works from production back to UAT, but it's more like when you want to refresh your UAT environment using a production environment. For that scenario, there are some other considerations that where DC needs to clean, let's say, remove access to that database and allow only one admin per user to access the UAT database, because you are moving production data to testing environments that not necessarily you want to share all this access to everybody, because it can have confidential information. So for this scenario for implementations, it's in the service requests section under environments. If I add a new request, you will see the database refresh request. It's how you can request to move data from environments that has SQL Azure, meaning that are sandbox to production. If you need to move data from your tier 1 environments, meaning, let's say, your development environment or your goal environment, back to your sandbox, you need to follow the wiki to do it manually. Yeah? So the point here is, depending from where you are moving the data is the process that you are going to use. Hopefully with the time we provide a tool so it can be everything from LCS. All right, so let's move to another interesting topic, that is sharing data. How we can use the data sharing framework to, let's say, we understand the data entities, we know that we can use data package. Now, how we can put another player, which is the data sharing, and how it works. What is the concept? Gokul will show you some what it means and a demo how it works.
Thanks, Alejandro. So, how many of you are using virtual companies in 2012 or 2009? Okay. You guys need to be aware of this. So we don't, in D365, we don't support virtual companies anymore. So this is a similar concept, but a different technology compared to virtual companies. Okay, in terms of data sharing framework, the framework is enabled using a policy. Within a policy, you can define tables that you want to share across companies, and within individual table, you can then say that I want this 5 or 6 fields that I want to replicate across companies, and then you can decide what companies you want to share this data with. And a typical example would be, like, let's say, a commission. So commission is a policy, and there are 3 tables beneath the commissions. So which is the commission group, sales group, and sales rep, right? So these are the 3 tables you would add under this policy and select all the fields, and then decide on what legal entities that you need to share this with, and then enable the policy. Once you enable this policy, the data is replicated in all the companies. So it has some conflict management too, so I'll just show you those options. And this entire thing is backed by a data entity. So which means that you have a flexibility to define this policy in any environment you want, test it, export it, and push it to any new environment. And then once you have imported it, you then enable it, boom, everything is synchronized. So, sorry. So as I mentioned, I have a policy. Beneath this policy, I have table 1 and table 2, and I have only identified that I want table 1, and within the table 1, I want field 1 and field 3. So that's what I would define in my policy, and then I would include legal entity 1 and 2, and then enable the policy. Once this is enabled, let's say you initially had your data in LE1, you enable this policy, the data is replicated to LE2. So in terms of replication, as I said, we have added certain features like conflict management and few other things, and we also do certain kind of validations. So that means that we let you have, or we kind of dictate some of the data integrity concepts so that you don't end up with an environment where you have inconsistent data. And this is key thing here. This is not a replacement for virtual company. So in virtual company, very high level, you always had one single source of truth. That means, let's say you had 10 companies and you had shared customer group. So beneath the tables, you just had only one record for all those companies. But this is a different technology. With this technology, let's say you have a customer group and you have shared it with 10 companies. So behind in tables, you have this customer group replicated in 10 companies, right? And if you update this customer group, it's updated in all the companies. So even though you don't have a single source of truth, but we synchronize immediately based on the things that you change. And in terms of limitations, we don't enable, right now we don't let you enable this framework for any transaction table or master table. So if you try to add, it will come back and tell you that we don't support these kind of tables, right? So the only tables currently we support is parameters, group, and reference tables. So that should take care of all your configuration elements. In terms of, there is one more limitation. So we only let you replicate around 1 million records per table, right? And typically your configurations would not go up to 1 million in let's say one table. So let's go through a demo here. This doesn't work. Sorry, this has a different set of keyboard here, so.
The right one.
So typically, like if you go to search here and type cross company, and you would see this menu item called cross company data sharing. That's the label. That's what we call within the system. And what you see here is all the policies that I have defined in this environment. And as I said, within a policy, there could be multiple tables. And within these tables, you can then go ahead and decide what fields you want to be replicated and the list of companies here. Right, so I have enabled this policy for USMF and USSI.
you can also specify by the field. It's not, in addition to the table, for one table, you can select which field you want to share. So you have that flexibility also.
Okay, let me quickly change this company here. Sorry, Alejandro, I'm struggling a bit with your laptop. What is it?
The network.
Okay, sorry for the hiccup. So let's take this particular payment terms, and for example, I have this payment term already replicated in USMF. So now, let's say I change the days to 10, and I want it for a month. I save it. So I'm in USSI company, and if I go to USMF, right now I don't have this setting. So if I refresh this, there we go. The month is 1 and 10 days, right? So as soon as you modify in any of these companies, so the data is immediately synchronized across all the companies.
This is one of the examples that if you have a data entity in your data project that has terms of payment, discard that, right? You load it just one time in your master legal entity configuration, but once you start to move to the next one, you don't need to include that because this framework will take care of that. It's one way to reduce the number of files to manage or data entities.
Okay, and as I said, this is backed by an entity, so that means you have a flexibility to export the data and move it to a different company. So the entity that you would use is the data sharing policy, and since you have this flexibility, let me just export this and show you how the file looks. So typically we have the customers that we have worked with, they have like 50 companies, 100 companies. So what this lets you do is once you have the policy, instead of you going and manually selecting these 50 companies for each policy, which is cumbersome, instead of that, you can export this policy and just in the Excel spreadsheet, you can add the list of companies that you want and import it back. Then you have all your 50 companies there. So we released this in August release, so anything after August release should have this. So this is how the file looks. So in here, you want to look for the organization column, and for example, in this case, this policy is enabled in USMF and USSI. So you can copy this string and then paste it for each of the companies you want. Then import it, boom, you're done.
It shows where those policies are constructed. Data policies.
As in?
The data policy that you're using for these
Yeah, the very first screen I showed, this is where you would configure. So you have the policy name here, and these are the tables and these are the companies. So within table, you can select what fields you want to replicate, and if this table is backed by a particular reference table, then you see this little icon, and if you haven't selected this, then you can explicitly share this particular table, so it will go and add a new table to this policies, whatever you have. So we have a lot more things to cover, so I'll be a little bit faster.
One question, Coco.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
And if for some reason I don't want to share some fields,
Yeah.
take out
Yeah, take out the flag. By default, when you add a table, none of the fields are enabled, so you go and choose what fields you want to add.
So the question was if we remove some fields, if we can stop sharing those, right? So yes, it's possible. This is an important point that once you enable the policy, you can disable the policy. So typically that happens when you are testing the policies, but once you are in production, we don't recommend to come here and mess with this.
Yeah, that's a key thing. So once you have enabled the policy, don't turn off the policy and make certain data changes and then start enabling. So that might lead you in terms of inconsistent data. Yeah, sorry. I'll take this question and then we'll go through.
So whenever you add a new table and try to associate a field, do you assume that the primary identifier of the table is by default?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you're, so okay. The question is if I add a table, let's say customer group, right? Is customer group ID enabled by default? Yes, because that's how the replication knows the uniqueness of the records. Okay, in terms of next topic that we want to cover, so sorry, I might have to brush through the slides because we have some demos. In terms of data migration, usually we see, so the major challenge we see is with high volume of data that you want to migrate with a given short window of cutover. To handle this, we have a few technologies and we have few processes, right? So we have a set-based operation, and this is the similar concept you had with 2012. So you can use enable set-based operation on a data entity. By default, we have certain entities that are shipped with set-based, and if you want different entities to have these capabilities, you have to override certain methods. So one of the key example here is ledger journal. So this entity supports set-based. So one thing that you need to be aware of with set-based is, so set-based, once you have the data in your staging table, it's grabbing the snapshot of your staging table, and at the SQL level, it is doing a bulk insert to your target table. So that, which means that you need to make sure that you have done validation on this data before you use this option. And just one more thing to note is, for example, if we are talking about journals, in some instances, you would expect certain values to be defaulted, like voucher number or few other things. So the set-based won't do that. So it will skip all the defaulting process. So you'll have to provide this as part of your spreadsheet. So you provide voucher numbers in your spreadsheet. And we also have a concept of bundling. I'll go through in detail on bundling. And then you could also use incremental migration. So DIXF natively supports incremental migration, right? And also, in some instances, we have recommended our customers when they have huge volume of data, let's say they want to migrate. They want to migrate a year worth of journal history. So typically, once you have validated this, you can go ahead and take a backup of your gold environment and migrate all these journals if they are signed off by the CFO and you don't expect this to be changed. So once you have it in the gold, then you can take the gold backup, which would be the basis for your production environment. And in some circumstances, we also recommend you to maybe rewrite a standard entity. So this is in very specific scenarios. For example, when we create standard entities, we cater to all the functionalities that are behind that entity, right? So for example, a purchase order. So in purchase order, this could cater to, like, let's say projects, asset management, few other things. So these entity is built to work with all different modules. In your very specific customer scenario, let's say you don't have projects and asset management, so you can kind of create your own entity or duplicate this entity and remove all the validations around projects and asset management, right? And also, if you have huge volume of data and you have like couple of days of cutover window, we can also like work with DSE. So you can work with DSE or us. Typically, each project will have a SA. So you can ask them, can we optimize production for cutover? Since we are on cloud, we have a benefit of elasticity. So for a specific time window, we can optimize production environment for you to meet that cutover SLAs. So I said you could use bundling. So bundling is a concept where this concept lets you import an entity in a parallel fashion. So let's say your entity had 500 records. Typically, if you don't have bundling, we create one batch task to copy data from staging to target. But now with bundling, you can decide that, hey, I want 5 batch tasks to run parallelly to consume this data and create it in target, right? So if you're coming from 2012, the setup has really changed. So the configuration is under framework parameters and entity settings. So typically you would see 3 settings here. The entity name. If you have left the entity name blank, that means it assumes that this particular rule applies to all the entities. And if you have provided a name or selected an entity, then it is very specific for that entity. And then you can mention your record threshold. So the record threshold could be like 500 records or 100K records. So for each of 100K records, I want, let's say, I want 10 parallel tasks or batch tasks. So that's where your import task count comes into picture. So this is a typical setup of bundling. So the very first line, you have entity as blank and the threshold level as 100, and you want 2 parallel tasks. So, and similar, I have 2 set up for customers, and I have the threshold limit and the task, right? So how will this work, and how will DIXF consume this data when you are importing, let's say, customers, right? So any file that contains 1 to 50 records, it will use 1 task. If you have anything greater than 500, then it will use all the 5 parallel tasks that you have mentioned. So you have a setting there. For anything above 500, I want 5. So for all the other entities, if you have records between 1 to 99, then it will use 1 task that is by default in nature. And if you have anything greater than 100, it will use 2 batch tasks that's mentioned. And we also have a concept of entity sequencing. And I think someone had this question yesterday. How do I kind of create dependencies between my tasks? So in this case, real quick, in terms of setup, we have an execution unit, level, and the sequence. And within the context of these 3 things, you can then mention the dependencies. So to mention the dependencies, you can say fail level on error or fail the entire execution unit. So based on this setup here, so all the execution units will execute parallelly. So if I have entity A, B, X and Y, so X and Y, they have execution level 2, and A and B have like execution level unit 1 level and the same sequence. So all these entities will be executed parallelly. And if you look at C, C is level 2 within execution unit 1. So, so the level and the sequence, they will be executed in a serial fashion. And in this case, let's just take a real quick look at the dependencies, right? So, for example, for C to start, it has to wait on A and B because I have fail execution on A and B set as yes. So that means if anything goes wrong with entity import A, I don't want to proceed with my execution unit 1. And similarly, so the C here, I'm saying that if C fails, then only this level fails. So if you notice E, it's at the same level as C. So if C fails, DIXF will not execute E. So, yeah. So what's the use in terms of how would this exactly help you? So in terms of real quick, this concept helps you to auto-sequence your entities. So if you have multiple entities that you are importing as part of data migration, then you can auto-sequence them. And usually, like in your typical data migration cycle, you will go through a planning process. Typically, a project manager would work with a functional lead and a developer, and they will go through the entities and find out the dependencies. But now we have auto-sequencing, so it will suggest you that this is the sequence you have to follow, but it's 90 to 95% right, so still you can get a developer to validate it. If there are any changes, he can fine-tune it. But you have the 90% of your plan ready. And this feature lets you enable importing your data migration using a package. So typically a developer would upload customers first, then customer address. So instead of that, you can have this entity sequence, combine everything in a package, and he uploads only the package. He need not go through individual files. Okay, in terms of demo, I want to quickly go through bundling, sequencing, and we are also introducing document attachments through entities. Okay, I don't have much time, so I'll...
You need to project.
I need to project here. Okay, I'll go through bundling first. And I'm just using customer group as example in this case. So just to note, bundling only works with batch option. So I have this data project for customer groups, and I have already Let me do it in a different fashion. So let me delete this. So in this example here, in this file, I have 700 records. And so to import it in batch, you would go to import options and import in batch. So I'll just give it a name. Customer group. Okay. So the batch job is created, and if I go to system administration, batch jobs, so this is the job that I just created. It should kick off in a minute, and let's go take a look at the file real quick. And if you look here, I have 700 records. So based on our setup, this should create 5 parallel tasks. Okay, it's executing. Okay, while that executes, so with fall release, we have this capability for you to upload documents. For example, you have customers, and while you're doing data migration, you want to attach certain documents with this customer or any other entity that you are importing. So we have certain samples here. All you would do is create a brand new entity, and you include the document ref entity, which is the base table that holds the document details, and you would beneath that you would add your data source that you want to import attachments with, and then all you need to do is create a reference, and we'll put this up in wiki shortly. So once you have this, and this is how typical data package would look like for uploading documents. So you would have a resource folder, and within the resource folder, you would have you need to copy all the files that you want to attach, right? And once you have them here, right now, I have given all the file extensions, but we expect you not to give any file extensions. So you need to upload the file, have the files without any extensions. And once you have the file, and this is a new entity, and this is the spreadsheet based off your entity. So you would have some kind of reference. Let's say if it is your customer master, you will have the customer account here, and type of the file, and the file contents file name is the name that you have provided for the file in your resource. So this is the link between the files you have provided and which customer those files go to, right? So once you have this, then once your data package is ready, all you need to do is, so let's say in this example, I have a vendor invoice header line, and the last one is the document, right? And if you see, I'm importing a pending invoice, and I just have one pending invoice here, So I'll just go ahead and import. So I have created a couple of records here for it to fail. And okay, so right now you see only one record. So let's see, let's just wait for this to complete. So we have one record in target. And if I go and refresh here, so this is the one I expected to upload. And if I go to attachments, I should see 4 files here. So yeah, the GIF image here, JPEG, and I have some URL type nodes, and with the upcoming release, we are also having capabilities around TIFF files. Yeah. And so this batch job should be complete now. So let me refresh. Okay, this is the last one. So it got executed now, and if I go to view task, sorry, if I go to batch job, batch history, and if I go to view task here, it's a little bit more. So if you see parallel tasks, those are the tasks that got created because of bundling. So I expected five parallel tasks. So as you see, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, and there should be one more at the bottom or somewhere down. 3. Okay.
Okay, so let's start to wrap up. Just 2 slides and we are done, but there is an important message that we want to share here. We passed the time already, sorry about that. Typically, data management, there are a lot of information that we would like to share. And
4 more minutes and then open for questions. We'll stay back after the session, so if you have any questions, you can come talk to us.
Okay, just to summarize, we explore different tools, different techniques, how one little setting can change the performance and the speed. Some common, let's say, patterns that we observe across implementations that we observe that takes the teams to a longer period of processing data management. So, but when you start to combine all of them, you can reduce those times and also optimize the effort that you invest on those. So, if we take all this on a process, this is how a typical implementation looks like, combining all these techniques. And if you are doing your first go live, let me explain just quickly what is happening. In this, we have let's assume that you have a golden environment and the production environment. Yes, you can use your production environment for your final test. Just you need to work with us to discuss that. But also, if you want to use your sandbox to do UAT, similar process applies. So think about this on your last test, your mod go live, your final run, when you already have all your migration tested, your configurations are done, when you are basically just want to do a final check. So we have the golden environment with all the configurations done, and for us, this becomes a milestone. That's complete. We move the data to the environment that we're going to use to do this final test, and using the DB backup restored. Once we reach this point, that becomes another milestone. For that point, we take note of the date and time. Why? Because we will have the capability to go back to this time. using another resource that we have in the sandbox and production environment, which is the point-in-time restore. The next milestone is to load all your master data. It can be your vendors, your customers. So you can do that with integrations with all the different techniques that Gokul showed previously. And when you finish, you have another milestone. Next one, you can load your opening balance, your beginning balances. Can be inventory, general ledger. And when you reach that one, again, you take note of that milestone. It's when you are ready to do the final testing and validation your key users. So, because you are creating transactions, and notice that you can be in the production environment or the UAT environment, it's important when you finish, you will, as a team, will validate, okay, how good was this data? Which data we can reuse for the final go live. So you can determine potentially that everything that you did in the golden config is good, and also perhaps vendors, customers, or master data. So it's when you can request a point-in-time restore to this database to that date and time. So what it means for the implementation in the last days, in the last milestone, which is the cutover, that you don't need to repeat all this process because it's already done. In addition, that perhaps if you have integrations, you have your endpoints configured to the final environment. You don't need to do that in that final week or the final days and have the chance to a risk or mistake on the configuration. At this point, you tested all this. So it's when you do now the final cutover. And what phase you will repeat? The ones that you cannot reuse. Typically is all related to the opening balances, right? Because you want to pump the latest data available at that point. But if you decide that you need to go back to the golden environment, you can do this. If you are doing this process in the sandbox, in UAT, let's say if you're using process or conference room pilots or iterations, it can be also cycle 1, iteration 1, 2, and 3, and you can go back if you need to. So in that one, you can consider that as a cycle as well. Yeah. So now this method does not work when you are using phase implementations because we cannot use the database restore to the production environment anymore. We have production transactions already, and it's live. So for that scenario, you move to the other where you have incremental, where you are using your data package. So why this is important? When we propose the database operations, we are not saying that forget about data package. We are saying that combine techniques based on the purpose and the time of the project. So if you are adding new legal entities or increasing the footprint, the functional footprint, of course, data package is the strategy to go. So it's why you need to plan with data packages in the start, because at some point you will need it. So this is how projects, many projects are going live with this process. And many projects that are going live faster is because they are combining. Yeah? And we work with you to determine the best approach. There can be variations of this process, but the main message here and the message in general in this session is that if you utilize all these tools properly and all these little settings that makes a big difference, it will increase the speed on your implementation and increase the quality also, because you don't need to repeat things. So,
just one thing, the second point is very key here with AX20. With 2012, a lot of our customers struggled when you had multiple functional go-lives, right? So either you go live in US first, then Canada, and subsequent. So this particular technology, like data packages, it lets you extract data from a gold environment and then push it to production. So that's a key differentiator.
Okay. So finally, in this deck, we are showing different reference that how you can read about moving databases, how you can utilize the data entities, and also for the teams that are implementing right now, you have access to the tech talks, and we expand this topic with more demos and content. There is a lot of information, but we really invite you to take a look on all these reference. You will have access to this deck, so you can also take a look on this data. Pardon me?
Yeah, we'll upload the latest one, yeah.
Yeah, so we want to, we will take the questions at the end. If you can come, we can answer you, but we want to thank you for your time. Sorry about the extension,
thanks a lot.
But thank you so much.